Frank is the executive chairman of the Center for Security Policy. His websites are securefreedom.org, counterjihad.com as well. And Frank, throw out the link to your radio show again.
Securefreedom.org is our main website, and they can find Secure Freedom Radio right there.
All right, Secure Freedom Radio. Okay, good. So Frank, all right, let's get right into it. A handful of big topics right now. Well, let's start one. Let's segue off of stateside politics because we're looking at Brunei, which is instituting Sharia law, which is something you've talked about as a growing threat globally on the show. I don't know, a couple of hundred times it seems like, and yet not taken seriously by the progressive left in the United States for whatever reason. And now now you've got your proof here. It's officially becoming doctrinaire Islamic law is now the law of the land in Brunei. What does this mean, and what do you think the reaction should be from us stateside?
Well, of course, Alex, most people couldn't find Brunei on a map if they had to, so I'm not sure this is the decisive turning point, but I think what you're getting at is that this is a doctrine that is embraced by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of people around the world. They're all Muslim, but not all Muslims want to live under Sharia or want to impose it on the rest of us. But there are plenty of them who believe it is Allah's will to do that. And what's happening in Brunei at the moment, to the great detriment of the people of Brunei, and what is happening in lots of other places around the world as well, is not only that Sharia law is in place and being imposed, and again, this is a brutally repressive, anti-homosexual, anti-woman, anti-human rights, totalitarian program that is being promoted in other places, including our own country. And, to the extent that we are pretending that it is not a problem, to the extent that we're pretending somehow it could all be compatible with our Constitution, we are setting ourselves up in due course for more concessions to those who seek to bring it here, and ultimately, the great detriment of the American people as well. And just on the point you made about the left is not only giving this a pass, they are enabling it, Alex, because they have made common cause with Sharia supremacists of the Muslim Brotherhood and the like, and they are, incredible as it may seem, given that, there are a lot of homosexuals the last time I checked in the left. There are a lot of feminists the last time I checked in the left. There are a lot of Jews the last time I checked on the left, and so on. These are people who will be put to the knife first if the Sharia supremacists have their way, and yet this community of which they're a part, the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League and J Street and on, these, institutions of the left are not only giving a pass, as you said, but actually promoting those who are trying to bring Sharia to America. It's outrageous, it's short-sighted to the extreme, and it's bad for all of us.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that this is what you've been warning against, and yet we are focused on whether or not it's Brett Kavanaugh who's bad for women. And by the way, even Joe Biden, who I think is still far too creepy to be president, but there are actual threats to women around the world. There are threats to gays around the world. And we don't have time to address those because we're addressing the nonsense here, which is part of the reason why you shouldn't be so quick to forgive everyone who led us down the Mueller hoax path in cable news, etc. Because this is all time taken away from actual news items that could have alerted people to things where there does need to be reporting. Let's stay in the Middle East for a second here, Frank. And there's a report that Hezbollah has set up an Iran-backed missile factory in Beirut. Give us the significance of this.
Alex, this is unfortunately just one manifestation of what Iran has been doing in Lebanon for decades. Building new missiles, apparently with precision-guided capabilities, is simply ratcheting up an already enormous threat to Israel. There are estimated to be over 100,000 rockets and missiles in southern Lebanon right now aimed at Israel, at least some of which can range the entirety of the Jewish state. If you give them advanced precision-guided capabilities as well, I don't know how else to describe it, but to say this poses an existential threat to the state of Israel. It has done enormously impressive work in building missile defenses, including technologies like the Iron Dome, which can select which attacking weapons to go after on the basis of what they're likely to hit. But still, 100,000 missiles, plus probably more, that haven't yet been taken into account or that are going to be built in this factory in Beirut. This is something that I think the Israelis are going to have to deal with, unfortunately, almost certainly by design at the hands of Hezbollah, with losses to the civilian population of Lebanon, because the Hezbollah, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps terrorist adjunct and proxy, has been putting their missile stockpiles and some of these factories and so on in the midst of civilian populations, in some cases under things like hospitals, for heaven's sakes. So to prevent this thing from metastasizing further, I fully anticipate that Israel is going to have to run the terrible, public relations problem of defeating this threat and in the course of it inevitably sustaining or causing collateral civilian casualties. But it's on Hezbollah if they have to do it, and Iran itself.
Yeah, and the Iran's influence is something that we really probably should be addressing more on the broadcast. So I'll make a point to do that more with you, Frank, on our time together. Let's turn to Venezuela. Taps are running dry in Venezuela. There's a blackout is choking water supplies now. Give us some of the details from your perspective on the blackout and also the efforts in people to try to remove the Maduro government, which are going slower than we'd like, as he's been able to kind of maintain control of the military, which is essential. What's going on there?
Alex, as we've been talking about now for weeks, when you think things can't possibly get worse in Venezuela, when people can't get basic necessities of life, everything from food and toilet paper, for heaven's sakes, and a living wage, now there's no power, or at best intermittent power. And one of the places, we talked about this in the context of your carpocalypse last week in the Washington, D.C. area, when you don't have electricity, one of the things that you don't have is potable water. And also, by the way, sewage, because everything comes to a screeching halt that requires electricity to operate it. So the neglect by the Maduro government of most of its infrastructure, including maintaining its hydroelectric dam, which produced a huge percentage of the cities of Venezuela's power, has meant now that with the increasing difficulties of that country, the dam, the power grid, the power supply, and all of the infrastructure it operates are now dysfunctional at best, if not completely kaput. And that means people are going to be so desperate for something to drink that they will do anything. They will drink dirty water in rivers and streams. They will drink, it seems, sewage water, horrific as that sounds, with the absolutely predictable consequence that you will have, diphtheria or other horrible, highly contagious diseases ravaging the country. So people will die. And we're watching Maduro cling to power and the army inexplicably still standing with him, even though this situation has now become truly catastrophic. It is scandalous, and I hold accountable the Russians, the Chinese, the Cubans, the Iranians, and the like, who are helping perpetuate this situation. They ought to be held accountable and punished what's happening now to the people of Venezuela, along with the Maduro regime itself.
And I would add the American media, who championed so much of what was going on in Venezuela under Hugo Chavez, and Maduro largely is an extension of that, and also doing nothing against the Castros, who have been empowered for the better part of a century now in Cuba, and they are they're very much holding up the Venezuelan regime in a major way. So, Frank, what should America's policy be when it comes to Venezuela?
Well, personally, I have felt for some time that we need to have a humanitarian intervention there with the nations of the region who, as you know, Alex, are suffering as well as the people of Venezuela, because millions of the Venezuelans are now coming to their countries, desperate for any kind of relief. And again, I think in addition to that, and you know, it may come to blows, but there will be millions of people who will be dying, millions more on the march. We think we've got a refugee crisis now. Wait till millions of people start pouring out of Venezuela simply because they can't survive there. But beyond that, Alex, I think the government of the United States has to impose costs on the Russians, on the Chinese, on the Cubans, on the Iranians, beyond what we've been doing in various respects already, specifically with a view to telling them, look, the Monroe Doctrine was there for a reason. Get out of our hemisphere and stop propping up people who are effectively destroying countries in it.
Amen there. All right, let's talk about Ambassador Bolton's strategy on China. He's denouncing Chinese provocations of Chinese jets violating Taiwanese airspace. What do you make of this show of force by China? I mean, it seems, Frank, it's hard to see with them. They're making so many aggressive moves on a daily basis, and they only really seem to be checked by the American intimidation factor. Other than that, there seems to be nothing on earth that is slowing down the Chinese. Perhaps I'm mistaken. Please correct me if I am wrong on that front. What is this provocation? We have an ally in Taiwan. This is a contentious thing with the Chinese because they don't regard Taiwan as a sovereign nation. They have a one China policy, and it's a dicey thing globally when it comes to how to deal with Taiwan. And what do you make of this flying into their airspace, violating it, and the Ambassador Bolton's reaction?
Well, again, Alex, this is a microcosm of a much larger problem. And as we talked about last week, we've launched a new committee on the present danger to try to pull together, you know, experts and national security practitioners and business leaders and others to help President Trump explain to the American people and adopt appropriate policy responses to what is now increasingly, evidently, the Chinese desire to go for it quite possibly kinetically with respect to Taiwan, but also in a whole host of other ways, in the so-called Belt and Road Initiative, colonizing Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe, their efforts to dominate space for military as well as civilian purposes, their economic warfare against the United States, which extends well beyond what's being addressed in these trade negotiations. And Alex, just to your specific point, what's most worrying, I think, is the Chinese evidently feel that the kind of pushback they've gotten to date, the correlation of forces, as the Soviets used to say, is such that they can go for it. They can, in fact, perhaps even use military force to conquer Taiwan, which they've made no secret is their ultimate ambition, if it comes to that. So I think we're very, very close to the tipping point. And what I'm commending the president and John Bolton and the U.S. military for doing now is standing up and saying, look, China is an existential threat, the present danger, if you will, to our own country, as well as our friends and allies and interests in places like, but not restricted to, the Western Pacific. And we need to have a redoubled presence there, military capability, economic power needs to be brought to bear, the tariffs, among other things, to try to ensure that the Chinese are continuing to be deterred from acting aggressively, whether it's against Taiwan or, for that matter, Japan or the Philippines or Vietnam or who knows who else, including quite possibly ourselves. This is the challenge of our time. This Present Danger Committee is a hallmark of an earlier response to a similar kind of threat, frankly, a much less serious threat from the Soviet Union back during the Cold War. And we're hopeful that we will be able, and we appreciate so much Breitbart's help in doing this, to really call attention to what the Chinese are up to across a broad front. And if I could just commend to your listeners the fruits of a very, very important rollout event we did last Monday that can be seen in a 2-hour-long video at presentdangerchina.org, which really lays out in some 21 serial 4-minute addresses the kinds of threats that we need to be focused on and be doing something about from communist China.
Absolutely. There's nothing bigger than China, and we talk about a lot of other things that are easier to wrap your mind around because the Chinese rivalry is so complex, but it is there's a good chance that this is the biggest issue facing us in the United States at this moment. So good for you guys for starting up this group, and we'll continue to bring you the latest on this at Breitbart.com and on the show. Frank, I got one more topic for you today. This is one I'm going to segue a little bit into immigration, which I'm going to cover when we come back from break. The latest on the immigration battle the president is going through right now, and he's getting yet again opposition from key Republicans who don't want him to freeze funds from Central American nations who are very much part and parcel to this moment we are in where we're seeing record numbers flooding over our borders. It is all encouraged by, as Fox News calls them, the 3 Mexican nations, among others, with Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Mexico itself, which is now becoming a field narco state, if it isn't already. And what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to continue to send them taxpayer dollars, even though they're doing nothing to stop what is another one of the great threats to the United States of America. We're supposed to just continue to cut them our taxpayer checks. The fact that Republicans are opposing the president on this, I find to be disheartening, but maybe there's something I'm missing here. Maybe there is some logic that I just can't get my puny little mind around, Frank.
Well, I don't think it's a puny little mind, Alex, but I think it's the fact that there's an argument to which I must say I have some sympathy, that if the governments involved, specifically the 3 south of Mexico, in actually stopping the flow of migrants from their nations to ours, it would be advisable to help support that with our taxpayer funding. The trouble is, there's precious little evidence that they're doing that.
That's correct.
And while some of those governments are on our side, I think you've got to get their attention. But here's the bottom line, as you talk about every day, Alex, and we need to. If you've got a finite amount of money, and we do, I would argue that as long as there is this magnet still drawing people from those countries and Mexico and elsewhere inexorably to ours, we have to secure our border with physical impediments to their getting here. That, if you have to prioritize the expenditure of your, immigration-related investment, that would seem to me to be the first order of business. And I would say to Republicans and Democrats alike, stop the easy access to our country, and you will do more than anything else you could do to discourage people from coming here from, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and elsewhere. If we don't do that, no matter how much money we throw at the governments down there, I think you're still going to see caravans and just immense numbers of people coming, especially as long as they understand that as long as they got some kid in tow, they get into our country guaranteed. And by the way, access to all of our social safety net as well. It's insane. That is the ultimate magnet. We have to stop them at the border.
Frank, when did it become that we don't need to demand anything in return for our foreign aid? I've been trying to note on the show, because I get calls all the time saying, why do we give any foreign aid? I say, well, theoretically, we're getting friendship, we're getting information, we're getting intel. There are things we're trading for it. It's barely even discussed now that there should be any quo to the quid of us cutting massive checks to countries all around the world, many of whom are hostile to our values.
Yeah, look, if you talk to the State Department or USAID, Alex, you will always be told, of course there are quos. Of course we're asking for these things. And of course, to varying degrees, we're even getting them. But it's not as much as it needs to be. But more to the point, the governments in question are both corrupt, by and large, and they are letting these people go, or certainly not interposing physical barriers to them leaving their countries at their border. Then neither is Mexico, by the way, preventing them from coming across the Mexican border so that they can ultimately get to ours. So in the absence of that, I just have to keep coming back to this basic, commonsensical position. We have to stop them at our border. Period. And that is going to require a wall in some places and other technologies and so on. But by and large, we're going to have a physical impediment to this if we want to stop what is now clearly a catastrophe in the making inside our own country as well.
Frank Gaffney, go to his securefreedom.org, also counterjihad.com. You can listen to his Secure Freedom Radio. And throw out that China web address again one more time, Frank.
PresentDangerChina.org.
All right, let's get that in the bio here, folks, on my end, so I make sure I can plug that myself. Going forward, Frank, always appreciate the information and analysis.
Thank you, my friend. Great to talk to you.